It's early morning in a mountain canyon. The air is cold and thin, the pines heavy with silence. I'm Maya Ellison, and this is Still Unanswered.
April 12, 1981. 14-year-old Sheila Sharp walks home from a neighbor's cabin in Keddie, California. She opens the front door of cabin 28, and she sees 3 people, 2 teenagers and her mother, lying in the living room, bound and fatally wounded. 1 child is missing. That missing child, 12-year-old Tina Sharp, won't be found until 3 years later, far from home.
The town would never be the same.
Wow.
Colin, when you first learned the basic facts of the Keddie murders, cabin 28, the 4 victims, Tina gone, what struck you about that scene?
The first thing that hit me, Maya, was the combination of brutality and sloppiness. The violence was intense, multiple weapons, bindings, overkill, but the killers left the scene in a way that allowed small, very human details, like a missing child, to be overlooked for hours. That mismatch tells you immediately we're not simply looking at a clean, professional hit. There are emotional elements, rage, control, but there are also clear investigative failures at the outset that compounded the harm.
Right, and we should be clear at the start. Everything we say here is grounded in the documented record, newspapers, later interviews, and the reinvestigation by Plumas County law enforcement. We won't speculate beyond the material we have. This is a case built on heavy facts and uncomfortable gaps.
Absolutely.
So let's set the scene. Keddie is not some anonymous suburb. It's a tiny, isolated former railroad resort in Plumas County. Dense trees, steep canyon walls, about 6 miles northwest of Quincy. It began around 1910 as a mountain getaway. By the late 1970s and 1980s, it had declined. Cabins were cheap and often rented long-term to families like the Sharps. People didn't always lock doors. Kids wandered between houses. Neighbors watched out for each other. Until they didn't.
You know, Maya, that sense of communal safety, doors unlocked, shared babysitting, can create real investigative complications when something like this happens. A crime in that environment means a lot of potential eyewitnesses and contamination. The downside is that in 1981, forensic science and crime scene protocol in a small county were limited, and the very social fabric that felt safe also increased the number of people into the crime scene before it could be secured.
Exactly. Cabin 28 itself was small, aging wood, 2 small bedrooms on the main level, a front living room where the killings happened, a kitchen off to the side, and a basement or utility room where the oldest son, John, slept. For the Sharps, it had been a step up from a tighter, more crowded life. Sue, Glenna Sue Sharp, was 36, a single mother trying to rebuild after leaving an abusive marriage. She'd moved into cabin 28 in November 1980 with her 5 children, working small public assistance and taking a CETA course to improve her job prospects.
I think that matters a lot. Sue had left an abusive relationship. She was trying to make a safer life for her children. That's an important human context, someone who had already been through threat and was still vulnerable. It's the kind of background that, tragically, can make a family more exposed to violence.
Let's talk about the kids briefly. Sheila, 14, who found the bodies. John, 15, the oldest son, who slept in the basement and was killed in the living room. Tina, 12, who disappeared that night and was later found dead. Rickie, about 10, and Greg, about 5, both survived, asleep in the boys' room, along with Justin Smartt, a 12-year-old friend who was sleeping over.
Yeah. 2 young survivors in 1 room, and 3 people killed in the living room. That configuration tells us something about control and selection. The killers bound and overpowered adults and older teens, and they removed 1 girl. The decision to take a child instead of leaving the house suggests either a purposeful plan to eliminate a witness or to take a victim, or an opportunistic, desperate act. Either way, it's chilling.
Before we run through the timeline, I want to normalize the emotions here. There's sorrow, frustration, outrage. This episode is somber and reflective. We'll walk through what's known, where investigators were effective, and where the investigation, frankly, was mishandled. And we'll always center the Sharp family, their lives, their survival, and their ongoing loss.
Agreed.
Okay, let's follow the day. On Saturday, April 11th, 1981, Sue drives with Sheila to Quincy to pick up John and his friend Dana Wingate. They head back to Keddie. John later returns to Quincy to a party. Meanwhile, at Cabin 28 that evening, Sue is home with Rickie and Greg and Justin. Justin is sleeping over. Tina spends part of the evening at the Seabolds, neighbors in Cabin 27, and returns to Cabin 28 around 9:30 p.m. Sheila goes to spend the night at the Seabolds and leaves Cabin 28 about 8 p.m., planning to sleep over.
There's also a sighting to note. Neighbors reported an unknown green van parked outside Cabin 28 around 9 p.m. That's the kind of small detail that becomes a puzzle piece later. In a small community, an unfamiliar vehicle at night stands out.
Right. And then the night unspools. Witnesses later remembered noises. A couple in Cabin 16 said they woke up to muffled screaming around, approximately 1:15 a.m. Other neighbors recalled a dog barking and a porch light turning on at around 4 a.m. But timeline details vary. John and Dana was a 17-year-old friend, had gone to a party and returned late, which complicates the exact hours.
That uncertainty matters for investigators because it's the difference between establishing where suspects or victims were at specific times. But what's not uncertain is the discovery. The next morning, Sheila walks home, opens the front door, and finds her mother, her brother, and John's friend Dana in the living room, dead. She runs for help, and soon the cabin is full of neighbors and deputies.
And the scene itself, Colin, this is where the brutality and control become painfully clear. John was on his back near the front door, wrists bound with white medical tape, ankles tied with a white extension cord. The same cord linked John and Dana. Dana was face down, also bound. Sue was found near a sofa, partly covered by a yellow blanket, gagged, and naked from the waist down. There were multiple weapons, a bent steak knife, a butcher knife, and a bloodied claw hammer found near the kitchen entrance.
It's important to state this calmly. The bindings, the tape, the cord, the variety of injuries indicate at least 2 attackers, likely more. The use of different types of tape and the extension cord suggest either opportunistic use of items at hand or different perpetrators bringing different tools. The fact that binding connected 2 victims shows an intent to control and restrain rather than a quick, chaotic spree.
Yes, and investigators at the time noted very few fingerprints on the scene, which suggested the attackers wore gloves or wiped surfaces. But DNA testing wasn't routine in 1981, and key samples weren't collected the way we would today. That was a major missed opportunity.
And we should say something about how the scene was handled. Multiple neighbors and deputies entered the cabin before it was secured. Jamie Seabold, one of the neighbors, woke the 3 boys by tapping a window and then pulled them out through that window to keep them from seeing the living room. But in doing so, he walked through parts of the crime scene and also entered the house through the back door to check for others, which contributed to contamination. The first deputy made a quick pass and then left. By the time sheriff and additional deputies arrived, at least 5 people had been in the house.
That contamination complicates everything. Blood, footprints, fingerprints, cooling of the scene. It's not unusual in rural cases of that era, but it's devastating for later forensic work.
And then there's Tina, and nobody realizes quickly that she's missing. Her shoes and jacket were absent, which suggested she might have been taken from the home while alive. It took hours before investigators understood she was not among the living or the dead. By the time the FBI became involved in relation to her possible abduction, precious early hours were gone.
3 years later, in April 1984,
Remains were found in rural Butte County at Camp 18, approximately 80 miles from Keddie, and DNA and forensic work at the time confirmed the remains belonged to Tina Sharp. The discovery was reportedly preceded by an anonymous call, suggesting the remains might be hers, a detail that only adds to the mystery.
That distance, 60 to 100 miles depending on reporting, raises questions about the killer's level of planning and the resources to move a body. It also suggests someone outside the immediate Cabin 28 circle may have been involved in disposal, or that the killers wanted to distance the act from the crime scene. But we should be careful. The incomplete remains made establishing a precise cause of death difficult.
Right. We're careful. We're also going to walk through the people investigators focused on. Most notably, Marty Smartt, John Beau Bouguide, and the curious case of Justin Smartt, the child who slept through, or so it seemed.
Right. We're careful. We're also going to walk through the people investigators focused on, most notably Marty Smartt, John Beau Bouguide, and the curious case of Justin Smartt, the child who slept through, or so it seemed. Marty Smartt lived in Cabin 26 with his wife Marilyn and son Justin. Neighbors described a man with a criminal history and a reputation for being abusive, particularly toward Marilyn. According to the record, Marilyn had confided in Sue about Marty's abusiveness, and Sue encouraged her to leave. Marty reportedly hated John Sharp and had a volatile relationship with the family dynamic. After the murders, Marty moved away from Keddie and later died in 2000. He was never charged.
There are some specific details investigators later highlighted. For example, Marilyn recalled seeing Marty and friend John Beau Bouguide burning unknown items in the wood stove around 2 a.m. Those items have been interpreted by some as possibly bloody clothing or other evidence, something you'd want to know about immediately. Marty also allegedly made some statements later that people interpreted as oblique confessions, and a letter was later found in case files that some see as incriminating in tone. But again, Marty was never formally charged.
Beau Bouguide is also an important person of interest on the record. He had an ex-convict background, rumors of transient criminality, and was linked to Marty. After the murders, both Marty and Beau left the state quickly, which investigators found suspicious. Like Marty, Beau also died years later without formal charges. Those exits from the area are the kind of behavior that, while not proof, raise legitimate suspicion.
Then there's Justin, the child witness. He initially said he slept through the night. Later, under hypnosis, he described waking and seeing two men in the living room attacking Sue and the others, one with longer hair and a mustache, one with shorter hair. Some have read those descriptions as aligning with Marty and Beau. But hypnosis is controversial. Recovered memories aren't reliable, and modern investigators treat hypnotic testimony with extreme caution.
Right. Hypnosis can introduce suggestion. What's useful is that Justin's description fits the broader investigative conclusion that at least two attackers were involved. But we can't treat his hypnotically retrieved statements as definitive proof of identity.
There are other theories we'll cover. Drug-related retaliation, an outside stranger, revenge from Sue's ex-husband, James Sharp. None are established in public records as proven. The strongest thread in the public record points to local suspects, Marty and Beau, because of motive, opportunity, and later physical evidence. But the record is messy.
Which brings us to the investigation itself. Early on, Plumas County Sheriff's Office led the case, with assistance from the California DOJ and later the FBI for Tina's abduction. But later investigators, particularly Special Investigator Mike Gamberg and Sheriff Greg Hagwood, have publicly criticized the original handling. They say the scene was contaminated, leads weren't followed, and evidence may have been overlooked or mismanaged. Gamberg even said, quote, "Someone right out of the academy could have done a better job." Those are strong words.
And they're not empty words. Gamberg and Hagwood returned to the case years later and said they found promising evidence. In the mid-2010s, a hammer was recovered near Keddie that matched the description of a missing hammer attributed to Marty Smartt. and investigators believed it could be one of the murder weapons. They also found an unopened envelope of medical tape in the evidence room, similar to the tape used to bind victims, suggesting earlier mishandling or mislabeling of evidence. These discoveries fueled renewed hope.
Hagwood and Gamberg went as far as to say their team had DNA and physical links connecting at least one living suspect to items from the scene. They described the case, from their perspective, as solved, while acknowledging that as of the latest public statements, no one had been charged. That's a key point. An internal or investigative conclusion is not the same as a public prosecutable case.
Exactly. And the reason those later claims are tense is that they point to systemic failure, either incompetence or negligence, that kept perpetrators free for decades. It's part of why this case haunts people. The thought that things could have been different had evidence been preserved and leads followed.
Let's pause for a second. It's easy to fall into what-ifs, but the facts, as documented, Tina's remains found miles away 3 years later, the discovery of the hammer, the envelope of tape, point to new lines of inquiry that earlier investigators didn't or couldn't pursue. These later investigators did what was possible with modern forensics, and that gives survivors something to cling to, the idea that the truth can be reached even decades later.
Sheila Sharp, who found the bodies and who then became guardian to her younger brothers, has spent much of her life living with the aftermath. She's been vocal in interviews and participated in documentaries and shows like People magazine Investigates to keep public attention on the case. She's described taking on the role of the mother for her brothers, protective and painfully aware that justice has been delayed.
The human cost can't be overstated. Rickie and Greg were children who grew up under a cloud of trauma. Their privacy is respected in public accounts, but the impact is clear. And the community of Keddie, once a place where doors stayed unlocked, shifted to locking doors, policing their own neighborhoods, and living with a sense of mistrust. A town's sense of safety was taken from them.
Cabin 28 itself became a grim landmark, drawing curiosity seekers and true crime tourists for years before it was demolished in 2004. The site was removed, but the story remains, and so we keep talking about it, because this case raises larger themes about rural policing, poverty and vulnerability, and investigative standards.
Which raises the debates at the heart of Keddie. Was it a targeted attack, perhaps motivated by Marty's anger and John's conflict with him, or a random invasion tied to drugs or strangers? Was Tina the target, sexually or because she might identify attackers, or a hostage taken to silence a witness? And did original investigators fail the family through incompetence or worse? These debates persist because evidence is incomplete, and because the human need for a coherent narrative meets the reality of missing pieces.
Let's talk specifics about the suspect's alleged actions that night. According to later reports, Marilyn Smartt said she saw Marty and Bo burning items around 2 a.m. If those items were bloody clothing, that's a potential post-crime destruction of evidence. Marty's later departure from the area and a letter in case files raised eyebrows. And then, fast forward decades, Hagwood says a hammer matching Marty's missing hammer was found near Keddie. Those are stacked details that make the local suspect theory compelling.
But we have to keep clear boundaries. Those details are compelling, but they're circumstantial until the physical evidence, the hammer, tape, or other items, carries admissible, identifiable DNA or other forensic links to a suspect that can stand in court. Investigators have said they have DNA matches or links, but without a public charging, we don't know how strong that prosecutorial case would be.
Colin, can you unpack why prosecutors might be hesitant, even with promising leads?
2 reasons, primarily. 1, chain of custody issues and contamination. Because so many people were in Cabin 28 early on, and because evidence was reportedly mishandled or misfiled, defense counsel could easily attack the integrity of the evidence. 2, the passage of time. Witness memories fade and records go missing. Even with DNA, you need a strong chain of corroborating evidence, witnesses, motive, opportunity, to convince a jury of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Prosecutors need that high degree of confidence because wrongful prosecutions are devastating. In small communities, they're even more volatile.
That makes sense. This is also why later investigators' criticisms of the original handling are so painful. They're not just criticisms for the sake of it. They're a statement that a better early response might have preserved the kind of evidence that would hold up today.
Yes. Gamberg and Hagwood's language has been forceful. They say people still alive know what happened. They say modern testing, including DNA potential links to living suspects, has given them confidence. But as Maya said, those statements haven't produced public charges as of early 2026. So the tension remains.
We should cover some of the alternative theories, too. Briefly, some locals suspected drug-related violence. Keddie and Quincy had transient populations and rumors of dealing. That theory tries to account for brutality and seemingly random selection. Another theory suggests an outside stranger, someone not from Keddie, carried this out. A third possibility is revenge from Sue's ex-husband, though there's no public evidence tying James Sharp to the crime. All of these sit in the record as theories, but aren't proven.
And that's an important methodological point. In cold cases, you catalog plausible scenarios and then test them against physical evidence. You don't reject plausible narratives, but you don't accept them without empirical support. Keddie shows how messy that process becomes when early evidence is compromised.
I want to circle back to Justin's hypnotic testimony for a moment. It's a controversial tool. Some believe it revealed two attackers, their appearance, long hair, mustache, and details of violence. Others caution that hypnosis can implant images from discussion, media, or suggestion. What's your take on how investigators should use such testimony, Colin?
Hypnosis can be a starting point for investigative leads, but it can't be used as evidence in court without independent corroboration. In Justin's case, his statements under hypnosis aligned with a two-attacker theory, which fits other parts of the case. But we should treat his account as suggestive, not conclusive. Modern investigators prefer physical evidence and contemporaneous statements over hypnotic recall.
One of the more haunting elements of the story is the anonymous call that reportedly alerted authorities to the discovery of Tina's remains in Butte County. Who made that call, and why wait 3 years? That's the stuff of nightmares for the family. Someone knows and didn't speak up earlier, or someone who did speak up spoke anonymously, depriving investigators of immediate leads.
It's a recurring theme in cold cases. Delayed informants, anonymous tips, and the weird timing of certain revelations. Sometimes people are afraid, sometimes they're protecting someone, sometimes they don't realize the relevance of what they know. All of these human factors can delay justice.
Sheila's long life after the murders is also central. She became the guardian of her younger brothers. She's participated in documentaries and interviews to keep attention on the case, trying to push for answers. The case has never left her. That's a through line in so many cold cases. The survivors become investigators in their own right.
And survivors carry complex responsibilities. They want answers, but they also want stability for the living family members. Public exposure can bring both pressure and hope. Sheila's willingness to speak publicly has helped keep the case alive in the media, which matters when local resources are limited.
Before we move to wrap up, I want to put a few concrete, unanswered questions on the table, because that's in part why this podcast exists. 1. What was the precise motive? 2. Exactly how many perpetrators and who were they? 3. What happened to Tina in her final hours, the circumstances of her abduction and death? 4. Did local law enforcement mishandle evidence in ways that prevented prosecution? 5. And finally, are the investigators who say they've identified a living suspect able to move forward with charges? And if not, why?
Those are the right questions. From an investigative standpoint, answers require a combination of solid physical evidence with admissible chain of custody, corroborating witness testimony, and credible motive. The later discoveries, the hammer, the tape envelope, reported DNA links, suggest progress, but the legal threshold for prosecution remains high, and rightly so.
We also need to reflect on the greater themes. This case is a painful example of how rural isolation and poverty can render people vulnerable, and how systemic limits in policing and forensics can compound tragedy. It shows the need for careful crime scene protocols, for community trust in investigations, and for the resources to keep cases cold only in name.
Yes, and we have to remember, beyond the forensic puzzles and investigative debates are real lives reshaped by violence. Sue Sharp left an abusive marriage to protect her children. She was building a new life. The family paid the ultimate price, and the survivors have carried the burden without closure for decades.
We're not closing this episode with a tidy ending, because there isn't one. That's the point. Keddie remains, in the formal sense, unsolved. But there are glimmers. Later investigators who say they've tied DNA to living suspects, recovered items that fit missing weapons, new attention from national media. None of this undoes the past, but it keeps the possibility of accountability alive.
And that matters. Even when a case languishes decades, persistent, methodical work, alongside public pressure and survivor advocacy, can produce breakthroughs. That's why continuing to ask the right questions, to revisit old evidence with new tools, and to keep the victim's humanity at the center is essential.
Colin, before we go, one short question. After working cold cases in rural counties, what would you say is the most important lesson for investigators coming to cases like Keddie now?
Be meticulous from the start. Secure the scene, document every movement, preserve every item, even small things like an envelope of tape. Because decades from now, when technology can test what couldn't be tested then, those preserved items can be the bridge to truth.
And one more for you, Colin. What gives you cautious hope in the Keddie story?
That later investigators, Hagwood and Gamberg, didn't give up. That they found physical items and pursued DNA. That survivors like Sheila kept telling the story. Those are small lights in a long, dark hallway.
Sheila, Rickie, Greg, if you're listening, I want you to know this. We are not here to make this story glow for entertainment. We're here to keep asking, to keep documenting, to center you. Your mother's courage and your loss matter.
And for listeners, if you have credible information that has not been shared with law enforcement, please contact Plumas County Sheriff's Office. Cold cases can be cracked when someone comes forward. Sometimes the missing piece is simply a memory shared late, but shared honestly.
We'll include links and contact information in the episode notes. There are resources including Plumas news coverage, KLO TV, CBS Sacramento reports, and People magazine segments that we used for this episode. All of them are in our sources list.
Maya, one last note. We mentioned the phrase, someone out of the academy could have done a better job. That's a hard line, but there's a constructive point. Law enforcement agencies must invest in training and preserve evidence. It's not just about blame. It's about preventing future families from living through this.
Yeah, and let's be honest. Prevention would mean better social supports, better responses to domestic violence, and more resources for rural law enforcement. Sue's story is also about the failures of social safety nets.
Agreed.
We'll leave you with the facts as they stand. 3 people killed in Cabin 28 on April 12, 1981. Glenna Sue Sharp, John Johnny Sharp, and Dana Wingate. 2 children, Rickie and Greg, survived. 1 child, Tina, was taken and later found in 1984. Investigators have named persons of interest and, decades later, found physical items that could link to suspects. As of early 2026, no one has been charged. The case remains, still unanswered. If you've been following this case for years, thank you for keeping the memory alive. If you're hearing it for the first time, We hope we treated the facts with care and the survivors with dignity.
Thank you for listening. Stay safe, keep asking the hard questions, and if you can, be kind to the people in your small towns. Those communities matter.
This has been Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison. We'll be back next week with another case, another family, another story demanding attention.